and I will share. How do I share Google Chrome? I just share everything. Why not? Okay, so got to do a little deep dive into iterating and stacking MRs. It's something that's quite difficult, but it also helps us move much faster, especially when we're doing bigger changes that require quite a lot of review. So often, we'll have quite a large feature change or whatever bug fix, and that will result in maybe 20 files are changed, and that's obviously quite difficult to review. So one approach we can take to that is splitting this up into logical chunks of reviewable code. That can be quite difficult. So I just thought I'd go over an example that I did recently. So I'm not sure if you're all aware, but we recently introduced new. What's happened? What's going on? Okay. What have I done? There we go. So we've introduced new validations for the code owners files, which says here. So this now validates if a owner is accessible, and that includes users and groups. So if they're actually members of the project, if they have a role high enough to actually approve an MR, and something else. So we've added 4 new validations. So one of those was originally added by Jerry, and then I've added 3 more in the last milestone. Actually 17, 11, so 2 milestones ago. So we've added inaccessible code owners, groups max role, so that checks if the group has at least a developer role, and then making sure that the users within those groups are also developers. So if we take a look at so I'll focus on the first one. So when you're trying to split down issues, it's important to look at everything as a whole. The way I do this is to first go through everything in my mind and try and get a sense of how I'll build the feature, and then try and break that down into small components that I can isolate and create MRs for that specific piece of functionality. So if we focus on this inaccessible code owner validation, so let's open this. So we are. Can you see my Vim? Can you only see Chrome? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I haven't really prepared for this, to be honest, but that's we should have. So first things first. So first we needed to identify the logic that we need to change before we can implement any changes. So that helps us to identify things that are blocking the change, and we can first modify those, and they can be done in their own MRs. And then identify the new changes that have to happen to make the feature work, and we can then break those down into smaller pieces. So for this change, I've identified some key changes that needed to happen. So the first one was needing a better way to manage errors within the code owners class. Previously, we were just assigning strings to the file, and we decided that we should actually implement a kind of similar to how active record errors work. You have their own class, and you can add an error to the file essentially. So that was one of the first tasks. So if we look at that change, you can see this, it still resulted in 10 files being changed, but this is specifically related to just adding a new error class. And so we actually have two classes. So errors, which is a collection of errors, and then those are also included in the file class and initialized. And we can now do like errors add within the code owners file. So I won't go over the code too much to show like what was implemented. I'll just kind of show like how I've broken this down. So you can see that this change here is specifically related just to those errors being added to the file. Where have we gone? And then follow on from that, we needed to be able to display. So we're adding a new error, which is the inaccessible owner code owner. So we needed a way to be able to actually supply that to the front end so the front end could render that. So I created a second MR, which simply adds the constants so that we can reference these constant. We can supply the actual error objects with a key. So we have this new key here. So we add the constants so the front end can actually find what error should be displayed, and that's its own subset of functionality. So you can imagine, like if we'd done this in one go, like already this is like 14 files.
So Joe, at that point, did you start using stacked diffs yet, or stacked?
No, so in this case, like these two were isolated enough that I didn't need to build on top of them. So I have actually mentioned down here. So there were some where I used stacked diffs. I didn't use the CLI tool. I would recommend checking it out. I did try it a long time ago, but I haven't really used it. When I tried it, it was still kind of early development, and there were a few issues with it, so I've stopped using it. But I'm meaning to actually start using it again. So I've actually been doing the same thing but manually. So the two that we've just looked at, I didn't use stack diffs. Like they were completely isolated code. I didn't need to reference them when I was working on the new validators. So, if you can do that, that's like perfect situation, because you can work on that and a separate thing. They can be reviewed completely separately, merged completely separately. They're completely unrelated. Perfect. But yeah, you do have this situation later where you end up working on pieces of code. So for example, here we have the actual validation process. So we've added a new process class, which is going to handle these three validations in sequence. And then the accessible owners finder logic, and then actually applying those errors that have been found to the file. So all three of those are kind of related to each other and they're dependent on each other. Like I couldn't begin working on 3 without having 1 and 2 done, right? So in this situation, these were stacked, which basically means the first one was pointing to master, the second one was targeting the branch which this one was source, like the source branch of this one. Third one was targeting the source branch of 2, essentially. So this becomes fairly challenging. You end up with a situation where this happens quite often, where you have the first MR will be reviewed, somebody will find a problem, ask for changes, but then that means when you add the new commit or rebase or whatever, the second and third MRs that have been stacked on top of that one then need to be rebased, and that can become really challenging. And that's where that stacked diff CLI really comes into use, because it does all of that stuff automatically for you. You just tell it, I need to update this part of the stack, and then it will automatically go down the stack and rebase them all for you. I think it even pushes them to the GitLab for you.
Yeah, pretty sure it does.
So definitely check that out. I've linked it here as well. But yeah, so splitting logic is really challenging. I think like it probably is easiest if you guys do actually look at these MRs and see how it's been split up, because it probably gives you a good idea of like how to break down work into smaller chunks of work so that you can review them in isolation. I've added some numbers here so you can actually see like we've got 10 files, 4 files, 5 files, 3 files, 6 files, 2 files, 3 files, 3 files, 4 files. Imagine like if this was just one MR, this would be an absolute nightmare to review. Like people would come to this and they would instantly turn off and just go, I'm not going to bother with that today. I'll come back tomorrow. Same thing tomorrow. Same thing next day. Before you know it, it's a week gone by, and you know you're really having to nag people to come and review your stuff. So the smaller your MRs are, the better. You'll notice like people review them much faster, and you'll also get much more focused feedback, and feedback that is actionable and more correct. Yeah, so I definitely recommend. Even if you think it's not worthwhile splitting it, it probably is. One case where you can't really split things is like adding a feature flag. Like I've tried to do this before, where you add a feature flag in its own MR, and like we're not allowed to do that. Like a feature flag has to be added with a piece of code. But most of the time, like there are very small things you can add in a small MR, and typically like you can get somebody to review that in half an hour. Done. It's merged in. And it's much smoother.
Joe, I had a quick question because I like this approach a lot, and one of the like kind of things I think about is the reviewer, like who you pick for your reviewer. Do you find that like even if you're driving towards like implementing one feature, so each MR, you know, may be a component, but it may not be like actually getting used yet. Do you try to find like one person that is going to be like a constant thread through that, or do you find it's totally fine to just have completely random, reviewers for everything?
It's a good question. Like I think if you can split your MRs up into logical components well enough, you shouldn't really need the same person to review them. Like they should be, scoped small enough that they can review it on its own without needing all of this extra context. Like they can just see this tiny little change and go, okay, that change makes sense. And then the next person comes along and goes, okay, you've just added like an extra method into there that does another thing. So if you can do that,
yeah,
I don't think you really need to find the same reviewer. I think some of these ones I did because I felt like it was quite important to get, I think, or maybe I didn't. Yeah, Jerry reviewed 2 of those. I felt like it might have been important in that situation for them to have the context of like why it's being done this way. But yeah, quite often I'll try and avoid that if I can.
makes sense. Yeah, I was just thinking it also probably encourages you to try to design the software well. So like, I mean,
Exactly.
ostensibly these components could actually be used in any, by any system that wants to use it. So makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would definitely encourage you to have a look through here. There's some additional examples for the other 2 validators as well. Yeah, there's a lot of MRs. This is the other thing. I mean, look how many MRs I did in one milestone, and that was just related to this feature. I had additional issues within this milestone as well. And normally I wouldn't be able to do this. If I'm doing like a really big MR, like you do, maybe 4 MRs in a month. Doing it this way, I was easily able, I think this month I put out 18 MRs or something crazy.
Yeah, and it lets you do multiple MRs while maintaining the velocity,
Exactly, yeah.
right? Instead of waiting for one to finish and get merged and then building on that when it's in master.
Yeah.
Doing branch-based building.
Are there any trickier things to manage about it than you expect? I've used the stacked MR CLI, the GLab CLI to do it. Managing it on your own, was there anything particularly tricky or?
I mean, the rebasing can be a bit of a headache. It does often, it'll wipe out all of your So I mentioned this down here in case you want to reference this later. So if you get approval on one of the, so like if I've got these three and the second one gets approved, but then the first one is rejected and asked for changes, when you rebase the second one and force push it, this is obviously going to wipe out that approval. So that can cause this situation where you keep asking for approval and then the first one gets rejected again and again and again. And that can be quite frustrating for the reviewer. So what I found in that case is if I get approval on the second one, I'll force push and it'll take out the approval and I won't request a reapproval until I know that the first one is done. Like obviously if you've changed something in the second one, then yeah, you could request a reapproval. But until I know the first one is done, like I'm not going to re-request approval for the second because I know that they're going to approve it. So yeah, that's one thing that I've noticed. But yeah, I mean, rebasing them, it does get, bit of getting used to. It is a bit of a faff. The CLI definitely is going to help with that. So I'd definitely recommend doing that if you can.
I think when I've done this in the past, I actually, I generally just put the first demo into review, wait for that to be done.
Exactly, yeah.
Basically whatever's targeting master is in review, but I actually don't, I don't put everything in review at the same time. And maybe that actually contributes to a feeling that, oh, maybe this is a little bit more time consuming than it should be. So maybe I need to be a bit
I used to do that. And then I realized it was slowing me down because, then you still have to wait until the first one's complete. Whereas, the reason, part of the reason is doing stack diffs is so it's kind of asynchronous, right? So it is a bit of a pain having this reset approvals, but it's still faster than, waiting, and eyes on it earlier is much better, in my opinion.
I guess the worry would be that you're kind of, if you're, just that you're going to be kind of rude to the approver in some regard, you know. But like if the feedback, I mean, I guess I wouldn't consider it too bad if that happened on something I was reviewing. So maybe I've just been paranoid.
But then again, this is like one of the beautiful things about making really small MRs is that reviewers don't feel the pain as much. So, if you're asking somebody to review 100 changes, then yeah, they're going to be like, dude, come on, like, why are you doing that? But if it's two pages, like, or two files, it's nothing, right? You can do that in 10 minutes. So
And you're probably
most people
less likely to
don't.
get like feedback in the first place. I mean,
Yeah.
when I've actually gone to the trouble to do this, I've found that people just like look at the tiny MR and they're like, looks good to me. And then it gets merged pretty quick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's great. And it often happens really quickly, which is really nice.
I think one of the places I've run into trouble doing this approach is when, one of the MRs will have a migration in it and, you need to make a change and then you need to, I don't know, I can't remember specifically, but sometimes like you need to drop tables, recreate tables all through back up through the stack and it can be quite frustrating.
Yeah, it can be. There's definitely downsides to it. But overall, I think the benefits definitely outweigh the cons.
Yeah.
Any more questions? I can't see the document.
I had just one kind of like maybe question kind of thought. I read a bunch of on our iteration docs, and it seems like they kind of try to make a distinction in like iteration value that like if you're not shipping the complete thing that a customer can use, it doesn't like quote count as an iteration. But I almost feel like you kind of have to think about this. It's just kind of I think this is just the other side of that iteration coin. Like you kind of can achieve the iteration that they're talking about quicker by doing this
Exactly.
type of an iteration. So yeah, did you have any thoughts on that?
I think strictly this is not what we refer to as iteration, but I agree. Like I think this is like a really good way of achieving that iteration of like delivering a piece of functionality and then building the next piece on top of that. This is a bit more meta than that, and it's like the next step down where you're iterating on the actual MR level, and that just helps you move faster towards the actual iteration of the feature itself.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. Okay, well, I guess I'll stop the recording.